Good morning, Dan and Amy. This just came over the transom. Trump to sign an executive order to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. No surprise there.
Exactly what our last guest told us.
Consistent with the broad strokes of his inaugural address and certainly what he said during the campaign and, his posture towards foreign entanglements, if you will, particularly in trade, where, as George Friedman writes in RealClearPolitics.com, George Friedman from Stratford had a good piece on kind of translating Trump's foreign policy disposition, saying there is a coherent disposition there, the rhetoric aside, there is a coherent disposition. And he says of trading benefits, Trump's foreign policy and foreign trade, it's not clear that the current international trade regime has benefited the United States. International trade is not an end in itself. It must serve the interests of each party, Trump's position. Large multilateral free trade agreements are therefore far too complex to fine-tune to the American interest and need to be avoided in favor of bilateral treaties, which seems to be the direction Trump intends to take, and this executive order is indicative of that. For more on this and a review of the weekend's activities from a Democrat perspective, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Joe Trippi, of course, Fox News contributor, as well as the author of the book, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. Joe Trippi, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
So first on some of his executive orders, particularly given what we have just learned in the areas of international trade, this is one of the areas where Trump presents a little bit of a challenge for Democrats, doesn't it? Because actions like this have great appeal among kind of the Bernie Sanders base of the party.
No, that's absolutely true. The other side of that coin, though, is that it also goes against sort of GOP orthodoxy of free markets and those kinds of things. So it's going to be, these executive orders, this one specifically, shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And it definitely is in keeping with, a major campaign promise or the major rhetoric of his campaign on trade, and, breaking up leaving the TPP, not joining it and being aggressive. The question is, what's that mean? What's the other side of that? And how much of a fight does he have in his own party on some of those trade? I mean, typically it's the Republicans that are for these trade agreements. So it's kind of fascinating to see how this plays out on both sides. But you are right. It's something that will be attractive to a lot of the Sanders and people on the left who also oppose these agreements.
So how do you think Donald Trump's first weekend in office went?
Look, I thought his speech was incredible in the sense that for the first time you had somebody standing there saying, hey, the establishment protected itself. A group of insiders, essentially on both sides, sat here in Washington and made sure they were okay while they did nothing to protect you. That was stunning, and I think right on, given that behind him stood two of the dynasties of that establishment, Bush and Clinton, both those families up there, and a host of senators on both Republicans and Democrat House members, Republican and Democrat, that were part of that establishment. So to make that accusation up there in front of the world, and to say that it's now me and you, meaning Trump and the people, I thought was, a pretty powerful speech. And then, whether it's, we can get into who started the crowd size war, but by the time he's, standing out at Langley, and by the time Sean Spicer goes out and sort of injects, more fire on that fight, we're now talking about everything but what I think was probably the most important aspect of the speech.
Right. As Peggy Noonan said of the speech, it was pow, right in the face. Trump presenting himself as a populist independent, not a Republican or even a conservative, but a populist independent. I think that's the right characterization. And I wonder, we've kind of had this running discussion this morning, the picking the fight with the press on crowd size, on treatment, both Trump and then subsequently Sean Spicer. Are they? Do you think that there is real political value in doing so? That Trump not only makes the message to the people from the dais with his inaugural address, but then turns around and continues to pick the fight he knows he can win, at least with a majority of Americans.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I understand the argument. I would have made it a little differently. It would have behooved them a lot better for Sean Spicer to have walked into that room and said, look, he said the establishment protected itself while the people weren't protected. He meant it. We are running an anti-establishment administration that's going to look out for the people first. And that means you too, media. And we are not going to take the bait. You can argue about crowd size all you want. We're going to argue about jobs, trade policies, and things that are going to. We're not playing your establishment game anymore. And I think that from the podium, instead of getting into the facts about white tarps and how many people rode Metro and who was, which were all wrong anyway. I don't want to say false, but he had bad information, whatever. Just doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm not arguing with what they're trying to do. I just wouldn't have done it that way.
But Sean Spicer's job, though, is to take and answer questions, correct? I mean, have you ever seen a press secretary just get in there and scold the media and then walk out?
Well, no, that's
it's so crazy.
Thing. So the whole thing was just that's what I'm saying. I'm not arguing with the posture of Trump administration against the media. That's obviously paid dividends for them throughout the campaign. They may find that a little tougher to gain more points than they already have. In other words, at some point, you start to get dwindling returns on keeping up the same thing. But it still was an unprecedented thing to walk into that room, scold the press, walk out, take no questions, and scold them with facts that just, were easy for many in the press to raise real questions and doubts about it.
Now, how does the left plan to go after Trump? It seems to me from this weekend there's a couple of avenues they're contemplating. One is to just loop Ashley Judd speeches from the National Mall and hope that Trump resigns. The second is this memo from David Brock. He's the head of the American Bridge Super PAC and all kinds of other organizations that Media Matters that go after conservatives and now Trump specifically. This memo that talks about defeating Trump through impeachment specifically. Brock claims to, this is from the Washington Free Beacon, Brock claims to have more than 20,000 hours of video, 289 candidate research books, the largest available archive of Trump research, and he's got a war room up and running, and he says basically that impeachment is the way that we are going to defeat Donald Trump. Is that grounded in reality?
Look, I think the only way to defeat Trump, or the better strategy, is to defeat him at the ballot box. And you've got elections in Virginia governor's race coming up in 2017. If the Republicans win that, if they win the House, continue to win the House in 2018, that's what you want to stop. You want to work on taking the energy that Democrats saw on the streets with the Women's March and other things that have been going on, and take that energy and focus it on winning elections, not just in the usual places, but also trying to win back places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. This other stuff, look, it's going to happen. People are going to take the party's in disarray. There's different factions. No one's going to unify behind one way to stop Trump. There's no way to do that. Just as, by the way, the Republicans took them 8 years to figure out with Donald Trump how to unify, pull in everybody, Tea Party and everybody, finally against Obama and the Democrats. It took a long time. Tea Party was going off in one direction. The Republican establishment was going off in another. They fought each other for, over how to do it, what to do. They had successes along the way, but it didn't. It took a long, long time for everybody to get on the same page. That's what's going to happen on the Democratic side, I think.
And something that happened last night that people are talking about this morning is last night Donald Trump had a reception for law enforcement and security officials, and James Comey was there, and he called him out and walked up and gave him a hug. Do you think optically that he shouldn't have done that? I mean, then he also said, James Comey's become more famous than me, and he chuckled.
Well, no, that's the kind of thing, again, perception, reality. There are a lot of Democrats who obviously feel that the Comey, the two letters, were done to help Donald Trump. Fair or not, there are millions of Americans who believe that, and certainly last night didn't do anything to persuade them any different. That's one of the interesting things about Trump. The same thing, frankly, with his inaugural speech. He isn't trying to convince people. Everybody goes, when's he going to make the turn? When's he going to pivot? He's not going to, and he's not even, trying to do some of the things he sort of alluded to working together in his speech, but it wasn't the real focus of his speech. That speech was essentially pointed to those folks who had already voted for him and those folks who were against the establishment in Washington. Frankly, that's what Sean Spicer going out in the briefing room was about. That appealed to people who have come to conclude already that the media is out to get Donald Trump and we're not going to take it anymore.
It seems like I'm sorry to interrupt, but it seems like the left is dug in a bit as well. I mean, I don't know what your thought is on how effective or helpful the weekend marches were in terms of the optics and the speeches coming out of those marches.
Well, I mean, the activism part of it, the numbers were certainly dramatic and positive in terms of the energy that frankly wasn't there for Hillary Clinton before the election. I mean, even though probably most of those people voted for her, that energy just wasn't there. That energy is now there, caused by Trump and not by her. And now the issue is, what do you do with it? And I agree with you. There are plenty of things said from those podiums that probably weren't helpful, or were just as repulsive to the Trumps and people on the fence as some of the things that Trump did during the campaign the other way. So it's going to be a long time before this country comes back together. I mean, that's the real lesson of the weekend. It's clear this isn't going to be even, after George Bush won in 2000 over Gore, there were these kinds of tensions, but there was, for the most part, the traditional weekend and everything kind of played out of people, handing olive branches to each other and trying to go through the semblance of working together. That's just not what we're seeing right now. And I'm not putting that on Trump. It's on everybody, the two sides. It's just become even more polarized.
Yeah, I agree with that. He is Joe Trippi, former campaign manager for Howard Dean, Fox News contributor, author of the book, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. Joe, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.